Climate Woke was born out of a need to have different voices present at the table of conversations relating to climate justice and environmental justice. I saw that the stories needing to be seen and heard were not getting the attention they deserved. Most importantly, I also saw that the culture and future we need to weather this storm called climate change was not being created with all of us in mind. As an artist and a filmmaker, I knew that we needed more artists of color driving the vision and amplifying the problem. With this need in mind, Climate Woke was born. After collaborations with movement groups and grassroots movements, we began bringing artists of color into the centerfold of our artistic projects. We began generating content alongside them. We educated them on the Just Transition framework, then created structured environments for commissions that turned into residencies. We knew we were up to something. So we began creating our own video content and holding space for convenings with high influencing artists who are hungry to make a difference and see their true power in transforming the narrative surrounding climate change. We couldn't forget about our amazing movement partners, so we gathered them and talked to them about the importance of incorporating artists and cultural workers into our organizing strategies that are so important. So here we are. We've tried some things, we've built strong relationships, and are excited to keep building more. Climate Woke has become a symbol of unity between us who have been left behind, forgotten, left to fend for ourselves, and most importantly, ignored in our potential. Climate Woke is not a singular campaign. It's a movement of people who look like me, like Ahmud Arbery and the Navajo community fighting to survive and fight for justice. Climate Woke is us giving ourselves a platform to complicate the conversations and integrate ourselves into the fold surrounding issues like fossil fuel extraction and air pollution. We matter in the conversation surrounding climate change because we know firsthand that we will also be and have been hit the most, the hardest, and first. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Layel Camargo. I'm the Ecological Arts and Culture Manager at the Center for Cultural Power, formerly known as Culture Strike. During our workshop, I want to encourage everyone to use the hashtag ClimateWoke to engage with us on social media. We have folks in the back end of this virtual gathering who are going to be feeding us some comments and some questions. Joining us today will also be actor and activist Kendrick Sampson, who will be here and join us for a Q&A, and let's see what he's up to since we last saw him. But before we start, I want to acknowledge the lands of the indigenous people whose lands we sit on. Specifically, I want to acknowledge the Chumash, the Gabrielino, the Tongva people whose original lands of Los Angeles, which Hollywood sits on. It's through their historical stewardship that we all benefit from. Let's honor their legacy by moving in integrity on this earth. I want to introduce my colleague and friend, Favianna Rodriguez. Favianna is an artist and activist who is also the president of the Center for Cultural Power. Her art addresses issues like migration, climate justice, and gender justice.
I want to start by inviting all of you to a moment of grounding. So if you are able, if you are willing, take a moment to get comfortable and put your feet on the ground. And we're going to start with a breathing exercise that consists of an inhale for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 4 seconds, and then releasing for 4 seconds. So let's go and get started. Let's take a deep breath in. Hold and release.
The air you breathe is all the oxygen that there is on the entirety of the planet. No oxygen is coming in and no oxygen is going out.
Let's take another deep breath in. Hold and release.
80% of the oxygen you breathe is recycled and given to you from our ocean.
And let's take another breath in. Hold and release. Hmm.
The air you breathe is the same air your ancestors and their ancestors used to breathe.
Hmm. And let's take our final breath collectively. Let's take in, hold, and release. Hmm.
Your breath is so
Hmm.
intentional and for the next 7
Hmm.
generations.
Hmm.
So we'd like to take a minute to just ask, what do folks think climate change is? If you could please tweet or comment on Facebook Live, what does climate change mean to you? Please use the hashtag ClimateWoke. Some things we might want to keep in mind is climate change didn't happen overnight. The climate crisis is as much of a symptom of a greater social, political, and economic problem as anything else that we're waking up to. And similarly, we're not going to solve this problem overnight, and we're not going to solve it through
Hmm.
bioengineering, geoengineering. It's actually going to require large systemic changes that I know we can all do together. But let's hear more about this.
I'm here to spill the beans on the big C. Fellas don't think it's real. Us ladies can't even talk about it. And for everyone in between and whatnot, forget about it. We can't even admit we have a big C. But lucky for you, I'm here to help. I know everything that has to do with the big climate crisis. The climate crisis is a result of a highly abundant resource that is constantly extracted. Most people think that this resource is fossil fuels. In reality, it's not. This resource is people. This is Rita. Instead of using her labor to meet her basic needs, Rita ends up selling her labor to someone else who decides what to do with her time. Like most workers, Rita's boss decides what work she does, even if this work harms her body, the planet, and everything else that lives on it. Oh, and the cherry on top? Rita's boss doesn't pay her a living wage. Meanwhile, Rita is stuck in a cycle of trying to make money just to make ends meet. This exploitation is possible because of the lie that one group of people are worth more than others. And by taking ourselves and our labor out of the equation when talking about climate change, we perpetuate a twisted fairy tale that this planet and its people are here to exploit. That life, soil, water, and air are here to package, sell, consume, and dispose of. It's a consequence of the exploitation of labor that is used to extract fossil fuels. To get to the root of the problem, we first have to address social inequity in our relationship as people to the living world. Climate change is something that we'll have to weather together. We have to reclaim our labor in all of its diverse forms that celebrate our different bodies, cultures, and ways of living on planet Earth. It's not about going back. It's about remembering our way forward. It's about working together to solve the big C.
Thank you so much for that video, Layel. And that's a great segment into what we're going to be talking about today. I want to start with my personal story and remind everyone that later in the program, we will have Kendrick Sampson join us for a Q&A. But let's get familiar first with some of the themes that were raised in the video. So I grew up in Oakland, California, in East Oakland. And as you can see from the image, I grew up in a community that was sandwiched by two freeways. So I grew up in Oakland in a largely immigrant community, in a black and brown community. And you can call it the tale of two cities, excuse me, the tale of two freeways. And so there's a freeway that runs across the mostly communities of color, and that's where you see the red and orange area. And then there's another freeway that runs along the top, which is where you can see the green areas. Now, um, in our community, the Black and brown people live along the areas where you see red. And what was happening here is that the trucks that drive through our community are polluting the air. And so as a result, you have high rates of asthma. However, if you look above on the map, you see the green areas. Those communities had actually fought so that diesel trucks and trucks were not going through their neighborhood. And this is exactly what climate injustice is that we as communities of color suffer a disproportionate amount of pollution. And you can see that the pollution is concentrated on the areas where Black and brown communities live. And so that was my reality growing up. And this is not unique to East Oakland. This is actually what is happening in many communities of color. And so we are going to take a poll and have a little interactive activity. Let's take a look at other neighborhoods let's focus in on California, because pollution caused by emissions, by the burning of fossil fuels, is not something that's unique just to my community. It's actually one of the ongoing problems. So we're going to be taking a look at another well-known Latinx hood. This is a community in Los Angeles. This is a community, very well-known barrio. And if you know, let's take a poll here and see if you can guess what this is. This is a community that is 94% Latinx, and the yellow part is where the cemetery is, right? So obviously there's no emissions in that area, but can you guess? This is a community where folks barely graduate high school, a Latinx community, and the median income is $33,000 a year. And so let's see, this community is Boyle Heights, y'all. This is Boyle Heights. And this is even worse than the community I was growing in, right? You could see here the level of toxins. And why is because Boyle Heights is surrounded by various freeways that make the air toxic. So let's go over to another community in Los Angeles, move around LA a bit. So this community is located by an airport, and it's a community that was made famous by a rap group. Actually, many amazing musicians have come out of this community. Again, it's by the freeway. What community could this be? Again, you see some of the red areas. Again, high concentration of toxic air. Y'all, this is not just orange. This is red. So is it Burbank? Is it Compton? The answer is Compton, right? So again, Black and brown communities are being impacted by the fossil fuel industry. But let's keep moving around LA. We're gonna go to another neighborhood. This neighborhood, what could this neighborhood be? This neighborhood looks very green. This neighborhood looks like the air is quite clean. This is a community in which 81% of the community is white, and the median income is $97,000. And in this community, more than 60% of residents have a college education. So what community could this be that is where the air is so great, while communities of color have to breathe in awful stuff that gives them respiratory disease for the rest of their lives, and that actually cuts their lifespan? What could this place be? You guessed it. It's Beverly Hills. And this really demonstrates that not only are communities of color disenfranchised, we know that police brutality is a problem in our community. We know that our education system, often we are having to fight even for a decent education. We're having to fight even to be safe in our own classrooms. And on top of that, we are also fighting an invisible enemy, which is dirty air and pollution. And so this really demonstrates the intersection of climate change with many other issues. Because, as we learned from the video, oil doesn't just extract itself, right? Fossil fuels are not just getting burned by themselves. It requires the exploitations of human beings in order to burn fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have to go through somewhere, and that somewhere is communities of color. They have to be extracted from somewhere, and those somewhere are indigenous land and communities of color. And so when we are talking about climate change, we have to remember the root causes. We have to remember that climate change is a product of how we are exploiting other human beings in the name of profit, and not in the name of the planet. Because if we really, really cared about the kids who are growing up in East Oakland or in Compton or in Boyle Heights, we would fight for clean air, which means, guess what? We would have to transition to a green economy. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. I'm an artist, I'm an activist, and I know many of you artists are joining us today. And so we're going to talk about why is culture important in fighting against climate change. And I'm going to be sharing some frameworks that can help empower you, whether you are an artist, an actor, a writer, a DJ, a musician, on really how important culture is in winning for climate. So first, culture is like the ocean that surrounds us all the time. Culture is like a wave, right? Culture is an ocean, and we're constantly swimming. And like water, culture can shift, and we make up the ocean, and so we can help shift culture through our stories. Just like water, you throw a rock into the water, and you create ripples. And that is what we can do as culture makers, right? Whether it's Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, or whether it's Rose McGowan speaking out against her story, culture is power. Next. I like to talk about, I just showed this slide. Next. Let's talk about the components of social change, and that is culture, politics, and economics. And a lot of times, we think that social change just happens in the political realm, but it doesn't. Social change also happens in the cultural realm, and it happens in the economic realm. And, when we think about, for example, the gun debate, right? When we think about that, we've been experiencing gun massacres in this country for over 10 years. In 2012, there was a shooting of many children in Sandy Hook that really devastated the entire country. And it was at that time that many Americans shared their stories and were really in favor of common sense gun reform. However, did we have change in the political sector? No. Did we have change in the economic sector? Did the Walmarts of the world, the Dick's Sporting Goods of the world, did they do anything? No, they didn't. However, the cultural momentum grew and grew. And fast forward to 2018, when you had a shooting in Florida on Valentine's Day at Stone and Marjorie High School. And it was immediately after that awful, awful shooting that you had young people who began to own their narrative and share out their narrative. And you had artists who began to share them. And within 2 weeks, Dick's Sporting Goods changed their policy. So we saw change in the economic sector. And we are slowly seeing change in the political sector. And so culture can activate, right? Culture is the growing of an idea. It's the momentum. And politics is usually the last to come. But what this tells us is that we need to change culture. Because culture can impact both the economic realm and the political realm. And how do we change culture? Through our stories. Next. Our stories are like stars in a galaxy. And, as human beings, we have understood the world around us through science and through art. And many of our ancestors gazed at the sky for orientation, to know where they were, and to even cross oceans. And so stories are like stars, and they shine bright. And when multiple people share their stories, they begin to connect their stories, and they form something called a constellation. And that's how we can think about narrative change. When one person shares a story, you inspire another person to share a story. And we saw this in Me Too. We saw how in that Me Too was a term that got very popularized. just a few years ago in late 2017. And by 2018, there was many courageous women who were sharing their stories about assault. And little by little, we heard more and more stories. And so something began to be illuminated, and we finally began to believe survivors. And that is the power of the story, is that you can inspire other people to speak out so that we begin to recognize patterns. And so the light becomes so bright that we can no longer ignore it. Next. A great example of this for folks in television is actually how it is that we were able to win marriage equity in this country. Now, I was a teenager in 1997 when Ellen DeGeneres first came out on television. And as y'all may remember, the first thing that Ellen did when she came out is she said, "I'm gay," and she gave her lover a peck. And that's really all we saw, was just a little kiss. But little by little, other shows started coming out, right? Like Will and Grace, Queer Eye, and The L Word. And between 1997 and 2004, I mean, if y'all know The L Word, we were definitely seeing more than a peck. And what does that mean is that culture was changing, y'all. We were seeing the stories reflected back to us. We also saw the story of a young man who was brutally killed in Wyoming, and that's Matthew Shepard, who was murdered in 1998. And shortly afterwards, a play got written about his life, The Laramie Project, which went on to become one of the most popular plays in high school. And so here we were, television was beginning to show the stories, and it was becoming normal to tell LGBTQ stories on television. However, politics was still lagging behind. In 2008, we had a very hateful piece of legislation in the state of California, Proposition 8, which tried to strip away LGBT people of their rights. And so politics was still kind of in another reality, right? It wasn't until 2009, 11 years after Matthew Shepard died, that we actually got a law written in his name. But culture kept moving ahead. We had Laverne Cox, one of the first transgender actresses on television on Orange is the New Black, years before even transgender bathroom laws were even a subject of discussion, right? And we even had the showcasing of stories of trans people in 2014 with Transparent. 2015, we saw a victory at the Supreme Court. But what does this tell us? Culture moves faster than politics, and we can change the culture around climate. We can make the shows, the art, to help move people on this issue, because sadly, last year, 2019, we only saw climate change on 3 television shows. And I'm not talking about docs, I'm talking about TV shows that people watch to be entertained. 3 mentions of climate change, despite it being one of the most important issues. Next. And so as culture makers, we can work in the space of ideas. We can introduce something new. It's not just about taking action. Of course, we need to transition to a clean energy. Yes, we need to get off fossil fuels. We need you guys to call your Congress people. We need you to show up in the streets. We need you to fight for the ocean. We need to fight alongside our young people. But we also really need the new ideas. What does a green future look like? What does it look like when we're all on solar power instead of on dirty oil? What does it look like when we're driving electric cars? What does our new future look like? Because the old future is what we're still seeing. As you all know, car culture is one of the biggest themes on movies. So how are we going to tell new kinds of stories that show a clean energy future, but that also show that we are actually, as consumers, we're questioning what we do, how we travel, how we move, how we eat? Because climate change is not just going to be solved with more capitalism. Climate change is going to be solved when we change our behaviors, and we can really understand that as people living in this country, we are creating 17 more times waste. We are having 17 more times the impact. And yet it's other countries around the world, countries that are predominantly people of color, who are paying the price. But how do we inspire people to reconnect with nature? What do we need to do? Well, we need to move in the realm of ideas. We need to be about our yes. Don't just be about the no. Of course, we don't want dirty oil. We don't want rising temperatures. We don't want rising sea levels. But what do we want? What does our yes look like? And how can we best show that in the art we make? because as artists, we can open hearts and minds. As artists, we have the power to ignite the imagination so that we could truly, truly show people what a green future looks like and get people excited, y'all. That's what we need to do. We need to make our environmentalism irresistible, and you as artists have the power to do that. Next. But I'm going to show you something which may be a little painful to see, is that here we are, as women of color, as queer folks, as young people, as people who really care about the environment. But you know what? We have a problem. We have a problem in Hollywood, and many of the folks at Time's Up showed us this, is that Hollywood is dominated by white men. Now, if you see the data over here, you will see that Hollywood is 96% white men. 96% directors, film directors, are men. 81% of board members are men. So what kind of perspective are we looking at, y'all? Whose perspective are we understanding the world around us? Because we know that culture is powerful. Music is powerful. Films. These are the things that transport us to another reality. But who's making this stuff? Well, these are the same guys that are also sitting at the climate meetings, and they ain't getting nothing done. So we need the stories of women. We need the stories of queer people, of people of color, of people with disabilities, of transgender folks. We actually even need to understand the perspective from animals' point of view, from the ocean's point of view. And so this is not just about creating new content. It's about actually fighting for equitable power in Hollywood so that all of our stories are included and we can truly see the roots of climate change. Next. So we need you to tell different kinds of stories. We need you to show us another way. We need to hear your stories of what it might have been like to grow in an impacted community. Or maybe you're somewhere in the South where you also lived through the impacts of something like Hurricane Katrina, or the polluting of our oceans. Or maybe your family members have worked in the coal industry or in the dirty oil industry. We need to hear more stories, and we need to be able to understand the different perspective, especially the perspective of Indigenous people. Because Indigenous people, although they are only 5% of the global population, they are protecting 80% of our biodiversity in this planet. Using the hashtag climate woke, we want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear how all this resonates with you. Is it inspiring you? We want to hear your ideas, because it's through collective cultural action, through us as artists coming together to create new narratives to save our planet, that we can truly have an impact. So I am very excited to transition to the next part of our conversation. I am super excited to welcome to the virtual stage with me my friend and a climate woke fellow enthusiast, Kendrick Sampson. Kendrick is an actor and an activist. He is on HBO's Insecure. A few years ago, he launched an organization called Build Power, which I'm very proud to support. And Build Power activates other actors around issues like gender justice, criminal justice, climate change, and mental health. So let's give a warm welcome to Kendrick Sampson. Woo! Kendrick, I'm so happy you're here. So Kendrick, why do you even care about climate change? Oh, unmute yourself. There you go. Oh, we still can't hear you, Kendrick. Okay, let's see. Let's wait a second. Okay, we are making some fixes over here so that we could hear our amazing friend, Kendrick, who actually, with Kendrick, we have facilitated a number of events like Climate Woke, and Kendrick is helping bring other artists to learn about this very critical issue. So let's see. Kendrick, not yet. Okay. Okay, so well, I'm gonna just talk about Kendrick's activism, because I actually think it's a really wonderful example of how, as an actor, Kendrick, before the pandemic happened, we would catch Kendrick actively helping organize around electoral politics. Kendrick has been very active, as being from somebody from Houston, Texas, is very active in making sure that the stories of Texas we don't leave behind. And also, most recently, Build Power launched a book club around mental health. And Kendrick shared his stories around how he's dealt with mental health. So I'm just, I, yeah, I've just been super excited to collaborate with Kendrick. And so let's see. Okay, darn, we can't. Let's see. Let's keep trying to work out our sound here. Okay, Kendrick. Yes. Okay, so well, as we wait for Kendrick, what can audience members do to get involved? So first is that really think about who is leading on the conversation in climate. You know, last year we saw young people, especially young women of color, from groups like This Is Zero Hour or Sunrise Movement, who were beginning to change the conversation on climate by really naming that as young people. You know, we as adults need to just take more bold action. And it's young people who are really are saying, hey, y'all, this is not something that can wait. We need to absolutely now propose solutions on climate. We need to move away from fossil fuels. And we need to also understand that there's a second cause of climate, which is animal agriculture. And so it is these young folks that have really been helping us change the conversation. So I encourage you to follow groups like This Is Zero Hour, the Sunrise Movement, and get involved in that way. And the second thing is, you know, especially now when we are sheltered at home, I used to be one of those people who was traveling once a week for my activism. And now I realize actually that perhaps I should rethink my behaviors, because we know that air travel is one of the leading causes of climate change. But I encourage you to really also look at your behaviors and think about how you might model some of these changes while also speaking out against the oil industry. Those are some ways to get involved. There's some very powerful organizations who are also looking at the impacts of the fossil fuel industry on our oceans. We know that we have a crisis. The oceans make up 70% of water on this body, and they also help sustain the ecosystem of our world. And so we getting active on water rights, getting active on ocean is critical. So next up, while we're gonna move some things around here as we are getting ready for Kendrick. And so I'm gonna pass it over to Layel Camargo to introduce a performer.
Hey guys. So while they figure that stuff out, hopefully we can get that Q&A going soon. I'm just gonna bring up to the stage an amazing, amazing poet and a dear friend that I have known for 14 years, Terisa Siagatonu, who is an award-winning poet, a teaching artist, a mental health educator, and a community leader. Born and rooted in the Bay Area, I just want to leave you all with some beautiful, beautiful words from Terisa. Terisa, take it away.
All right. What's up, family? Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for being in this critical conversation with us through Climate Woke. The poem I'm sharing with you is actually one that I brought with me when I attended the 2015 United Nations on Climate Change in Paris 5 years ago. At that time, my writing and my work didn't focus so much on climate change directly. But after that experience, my work took a very sharp turn into that direction. And so this poem is very much for anyone who maybe doesn't feel like an environmentalist or feels like they're still trying to figure out what their role is in this movement towards a world that we deserve. Just know that there is a place for you in it as we're trying to create and put language to it. I know that as artists, we're at the heart of it. So much of art is the soul of who we are in our communities. And so I offer you this poem in the spirit of that. It's called Layers. I don't know much about how to talk about climate change, but I do know a thing or two about water. I know that San Francisco, city of my birth, was running out of it, as in the state of California was losing its memory of what lakes look like because not enough rain had fallen to replenish them. I know that my island of Samoa is thriving off of the very thing that plans to kill it once the sea levels are too high to distinguish the difference between swimming and drowning. I know that the tsunami spared my grandpa's home back in September of 2009, but took 200 others. How no one in my family ever dared to call that a blessing. I'm not always confident when it comes to talking about the impacts of fossil fuels or carbon footprints, but I do know a hell of a lot about poverty and the paradoxes of being poor. How saving the environment rarely means saving those who come from environments like mine, where Black and brown bodies are riddled with despair, too worried about going broke to even worry about going green, losing their will to fight the foreclosure signs, sprouting on their blocks like redwoods, worried about how to make a dollar stretch with dignity, to even worry about saving anything else but themselves, and I can't blame them. According to a poll, most Americans know that the climate is changing, but they say that they're just not that worried about it. They say that it's too distant for them to care about it right now, too abstract, too big, too rich to care about it affecting them, too poor to prioritize caring about how it affects them. Climate change isn't always something that I feel confident talking about, but I know what it's like to watch Mother Nature, watch other mothers grieving in the streets as their child's Black body decomposes on hot gravel, at the feet of police brutality, in the face of an iPhone camera. Watch the rest of the world watch our extinction go viral. Another version of an inconvenient truth. Call this a debate if you want. Call this a left-wing liberal protest cry all you want. But this is what I know about climate change. I know the academics who take my community's pain and use it in a grant proposal without our permission. I know the reporters who take my community's grief and use it as a fear tactic. I know the price of greed and the people who have to pay for it a third world away. I know how to trace the puppet strings back to the corporations who hold the world's wealth for hostage in their back pockets while the rest of us spend our lives paying for the gun. I know what it's like to come from the most powerful country on the planet, forever pregnant off of its own power. There are those who want to talk about climate change, yet don't want to talk about how those who are affected the most can't prioritize it in the first place, because prioritizing it would mean being forced to pull the layers back and also talk about the poverty, the settler colonialism, the white supremacy, the injustice, the privilege, the hush money, the hit list that climate change is operating from, the rounds it makes on Earth, starting with the most vulnerable. Everyone is affected by climate change, yet some are affected first. Yet no one cares until it is affecting them. This is for those of us who may never have the language, who may never read the reports, who may never have all of the data, but who still have a voice, y'all. This is for those of us who can't afford rent, but who also can't afford to wait. For those of us who are ready to act, even if it means you're doing it for someone you don't even know, in a place on the other side of the world you didn't even know existed. There are those of us who are talking about climate change, and then there are those of us who are fighting it. This is for those of us who have always had to figure out a way to do both.
Wow. Wow. Every time I hear Terisa's poetry, it just like blows my mind.
Thank you so much, y'all. Thank you.
Every time I hear Terisa, it just like blows my mind. You just remind me the importance that artists have in being active on social issues, because there's a finesse that happens with poetry, with writing, that the same finesse that happens with visual art, the same finesse that happens with filmmaking, the same finesse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that just helps really activate the mind and the the thinking and the whole body experience of what we're actually living through. So you're a very strong testament to why we do this work, why Climate Woke exists, to incorporate artists instead of just joining a campaign or just latching on to some kind of political action or economic change that's necessary. Nothing is less than, but we can't forget about the arts. Terisa, since we're having a little bit of changes on the back end, would it be okay if I just ask you for a little reflection on how are you feeling about your work and specifically doing your poetry to serve Mother Earth?
Sure. Yeah, thanks again. It's really powerful to really feel like your story matters in these big, heady topics that oftentimes are not welcoming or not available or accessible to a lot of us who come from communities like mine, I would say. But it wasn't until I was actually in these spaces with like global leaders who were having a hard time languaging this for just the, like the community that was in the room. And I was like, oh, that's because they haven't had to actually like break down what this means and the impact that this actually has on those who it impacts the most. And that's actually the power of art and the power of artists, and where I actually found the mana or the power in me to actually tell my story and create spaces where other folks could do the same. Because the last thing we need is for folks to feel apathetic or feel hopeless about what to do. There's so much you can do, and it actually does start with telling our stories.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's like so important. And I hope that a lot of folks listening out there are resonating with the words of Terisa, because it isn't, art is just such a beautiful thing and everybody can incorporate. So thank you, Terisa, so much for your time, for blessing us with your words. We're so lucky to have you a part of the Climate Woke family.
Of
and
course.
We'll see you on the next one. We'll see you on the next workshop, the next thing that we do.
Sounds great. Thanks, y'all.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. So we're going to change things up a bit. Kendrick is in our hearts until he can join us. In the meantime, I get to have a wonderful discussion with my friend Layel, and we're going to be talking about what do we mean by capitalism and consumerism. Let's start first with Layel. Layel, in addition to being a climate activist, you help direct some of these films where we're talking about consumerism. You yourself also are a zero waste activist. Tell us about why individual action as well as collective action is important.
Yeah. So I did do a lot of advocacy around zero waste when I actually first came into this work. I realized that like individual action is what I felt empowered to do, because thinking about policy and major changes was so overwhelming. And so when I think about the work that sorry, there's like my noise is on here, but I'm gonna wrap this up. Is Favi, I'm sorry, there's like a lot of back end conversations I'm having a hard time hearing. But I think, I love your question, but for like the sake of time, why don't we just bring Kendrick back on? Because I think the audio stuff is working. So I don't need to talk about capitalism. Let's just have Kendrick break it down.
Yay! Welcome, Kendrick. Finally,
I care about, just make sure y'all can hear me. Y'all can hear me now? Okay. Okay, good. I care about climate change. I care about the environment. I care about life. I care about the intersectionality of it all. There's nothing when, we're fighting for racial justice, we're fighting for abolition of systems that are oppressive. I mean, you have actually done a beautiful job of teaching me, Gopal has opened up my mind and showed me that even further the interconnectivity of everything. But the main thing is that oppression leads to the climate crisis. You know, that is the biggest contributor to this climate crisis, whether it is, you know, the abuse and torture of animals, or the abuse and torture of people, and our climate, and the, you know, extractive economy that we support. When we're talking about capitalism, when we're talking about all of these different systems oppressive systems that we want to end, or actually, I can even talk about it in terms of mental health. We've been working really, really hard on putting together this mental health campaign, and you know what we realize is, because of environmental racism, because of problems with your health, your physical health, because of you know, poor air quality and poor water quality. Think about the mental health effects of the Flint crisis. You have this. You can't have great mental health without a beautiful environment to live in. You can't, unless our Mother Earth is thriving, we can't solve the mental health crisis. I hear all this in my ear.
Yeah.
Well,
I have another question for you, Kendrick. You know, you're very active in helping end systems of mass incarceration, of educating on the true impacts of a police state, and as well as
hold on. Somebody mute your mic, because I'm hearing like a really bad echo.
Yeah, we're getting an echo, and so anyone who's not, let's mute everyone else besides Kendrick and I. There we go.
Okay,
so how do you think you're very active in issues around ending mass incarceration, addressing the impacts of the police state, including police brutality and police killings, and of course, you're very active around racial justice. How do you see the issues of racial justice and mass incarceration intersect with the climate crisis?
Well, of course, you see, like, you know, the history of this country with redlining and such, and confining people of color, especially Black folks and Indigenous folks, to some of the land with the poorest air quality. You know, caged in by roadways and highways and high pollution areas and poor water quality, and the attack, as we saw in Standing Rock and in Flint, the attack on our right to clean water. It is environmental racism. And then, of course, when you talk about, you know, like we've talked about a lot, the punishment economy, or the extractive economy, and what capitalism looks like, and the continued slavery through the prison industrial complex, and slave catching through police violence, and you see how we just throw people away, right? And you put them in these prisons that were built on toxic sites, that have toxic water, toxic air, some of the worst places, because we are okay with the violent history of this country. I love the thought process. I'm not sure if you've talked about this already, but in looking at oppression and how it deals with how it contributes to the climate crisis, how they, you know, the genocide of Indigenous folks worldwide, but especially here, has diminished our connection with the land to a great degree. You're not only, I know Gopal was talking about this, you're not only killing off people, you're killing off information, you're killing off, you know, people with the closest connection to the land, and whole languages. When we talk about biodiversity and the need for all of, you know, it's just, it's incredible when you think about it logically. You know, people have the way that Indigenous folks communicate with their language. There's certain things that cannot be translated, and they have a special relationship with specific areas of this earth, and how to take care of it, and how to live in harmony with it, and not punish it and not torture our Mother Earth, right? And
Right.
each other.
Yeah.
And kills off that information that we desperately need to heal Mother Earth and our societies, our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. What we talk about, and what our friend Gopal Dayani from Movement Generation has taught many of us is that it's really a system that exploits people, planet, and animals, right? That exploits life. And the problem with this system is that it exploits life in the favor of a benefit for the few. And that's why we have people in prison fighting some of the worst wildfires that our state has seen, right? Because they are treated as labor that can be disposed of. And similar to the many, many immigrants working in the meat industry, right? We know that animal agriculture has been destroying our most biodiverse regions. And yet it's immigrants who are forced into these positions, as we've been seeing recently with the pandemic, is that people are viewed as expendable. And those people might be people inside of cages. They might be immigrants. They might be people who grow up in East Oakland or in Compton. And that's really the trouble with our system and how interconnected they are. So Kendrick, you're an actor. And one of the questions that came up early is, what are some advice you have for actors who want to get more active, especially around climate? What can they do?
They can follow amazing folks like yourself and get educated. I think that we need to make sure that we're highlighting people of color, the people that are closest to the pain, right? That's what a lot of folks talk about in grassroots activism, is making sure that we're centering the people closest to the pain because they're most likely to have the best solutions, and not leave people out in those solutions, have intersectional solutions. Make sure that we're focusing on the most vulnerable, but in your in following these, Sunrise Movement and some of these folks, make sure that you're always centering the most vulnerable, that you're always thinking about Black and Brown folks and Indigenous folks, and people with disabilities and mental illnesses, and how they're affected by this crisis. There's, beautiful information, and we've seen a lot of the youth like Chutesco and Isra and so many dope young people of color, especially women of color, young girls, taking this movement to a new level and looking at the Green New Deal and how the Green New Deal, breaking that down and how intersectional it is, and how it addresses many different facets of oppression, because it acknowledges that we can't solve our crisis of the abuse of Mother Earth and without solving those other problems, without solving homelessness and joblessness and such.
And Kendrick, we just have about 2 minutes left. Tell us in 1 minute, what is the connection between mental health and nature?
Well, in simple terms, I'm not good at short answers, but in simple terms, you cannot, physically, you cannot be well in an environment that is toxic, and you cannot align your mental and spiritual health if your physical health is constantly under attack. So we have to, it's all interconnected, and we have to make sure that we solve that crisis. I'm going to just add a couple things, just real simple things. We need sun, we need clean air. That is something that you think about when you think about depression. A lot of the time they say you need to increase your vitamin D, which is sun. But a lot of people don't necessarily want to go outside because there's poor air quality or whatever. So that's just a simple example. But yes, that is
right. Great. Thank you so much, Kendrick. And you can learn about Kendrick's organization, Build Power. That's spelled BLDPWR. You can find us on Twitter, on Instagram. Join the book club, where this month Build Power is talking about mental health. And be sure to look up the hashtag Climate Woke, where you can follow some of our work. Before we wrap today, just want to give a shout out to one of our partners. I encourage you all to check out the NDN Collective. They are an Indigenous artist collective, NDN Collective, N as in Nancy, D as in dog, N as in Nancy. You can find them on Instagram or on Twitter, and they are currently supporting many other Indigenous artists. They've awarded already 2.3 million to 80 partners and helping Indigenous folks stay afloat, because as you know, COVID is disproportionately impacting communities of color and especially Indigenous people. All right, y'all, stay climate woke. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a lovely weekend. You can find me at Favianna1 with the number 1. You can find Layel at The Chosen Life, and that's a Chosen Life with a Y. And you can find our organization at Culture Strike. And you can find Terisa at Terisa Siagatonu. And you can find us all on the YIA feed as well. Thanks, y'all. Stay climate woke.
Hey, Zena here. It's so great to hear all of the wonderful information about sustainable production. I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon, and I wanted to tell you about an industry initiative called the Creative Industries Pact for Sustainable Action. This is a global initiative created by multi-stakeholders. A lot of different folks chimed in on the development of the pact. It took 10 months to develop, and it references past industry initiatives that have taken place and also international initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, to make a really robust framework, common set of goals for any organization in the creative industries to sign on to endorse. It's a voluntary pledge. It's a common set of goals that span anything from creating a strategy. Any organization can create a strategy to work towards sustainable practices, no matter what part of the organization, what type of organization in and around the creative industries. So any organization can do that. Another one is educating the workforce. That's going to look different depending on your organization. It's going to look different depending on where you are in the world, what resources you have, all of that. So these broad goals in the pact are meant to take advantage of local context. And it's a real opportunity for us to learn from each other because it's a global initiative and because different organizations are going to implement these in different ways. We're going to get nuggets of insight from organizations from around the world that will inspire and help us, no matter what organization, move forward collectively in the creative industries. The creative industries inherently are creative. So there's a lot of opportunity to get creative on how you implement each of the goals in the pact and how you talk about it. One of the key tenets of the pact, communicate what you're doing. That's really key, because if we talk about our journey, it will inspire others. Other folks will get on board, see what we're doing, sign the pact, and take some of the ideas and really start working toward them together. And, another goal in the pact is reducing consumption of fuel and materials so that, we have a lighter impact on the environment. That's really, really key. What are you able to reduce? How are you able to reduce it? Let your industry know and really start working toward that. Keep track yourself, and that way you can continue to improve over time. So those are a couple of examples of goals that are in the pact. But the key point here is all industry organizations who have signed the pact are working on something collectively together. Right now, we have 85 signatories from 13 countries around the world. That's amazing. This pact launched in December of 2019 in conjunction with the COP25 meeting in Spain. And now we've got 85 organizations, every organization from film commissions, membership-based organizations, unions, production companies in and around the film, TV, advertising, creative industry. So think about where your organization falls in that. And my call to action to you is go to the PACT website, creativeindustriespact.com. Go to the website, read the goals, think about how they apply to your slice of the industry and sign on, use it as a framework, and work toward these goals together with many other organizations. And then lastly, talk about it. That is a very key part. Talk about it. Work to implement and then talk about it. We get inspired when we hear stories from others. And that's a key part of the PACT is sharing your story, talking about what you're doing. So that's my call to action. Go to the website, read the goals, sign the PACT, and take action. Thanks for having me.
Every time you take water or use water, it comes from somewhere. And that somewhere it comes from, you're taking the life and the color, you're sucking those things out of a different area.
A lot of them are just not informed about where their water comes from.
Sometimes I feel like it's a trend to support Indigenous people.
The people of Los Angeles hold a key role in this struggle because they're the ones with the say. We live around how to preserve and take care of that water.
LA says they have a moral obligation to the indigenous people here in the Owens Valley, but yet they haven't upheld that.
And from then on, life as we knew it changed completely. With the Spanish forcing their ways on us, you were either going to be beaten or murdered. It wasn't a choice for us. Either you sign this paper or you die. In that fear of wanting to survive, it made them choose the religion, it made them choose the language, it made them choose a name from the Bible just to stay alive.
Then it changed entirely when LA came on.
They knew that they needed more water for LA to get bigger.
The city of LA drained that lake in under a decade.
And that's where they got the idea of building LA Aqueduct.
Everything you do depends on that water.
What is going to happen if all of a sudden water is no longer able to come from all these other sources? That by the time LA residents recognize that there's an issue, it's catastrophe.
Hi, my name's Emma Rose Cohen, and my preferred gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the CEO and founder of Final. Final is on a mission to reduce single-use plastic waste by creating badass tools to reduce your single-use plastic. So we're working on an entire line of foreverables, which are items that are designed to replace single-use plastic and last forever. We believe that waste is just a design flaw. And so by creating these innovative products, we're encouraging people to live more sustainably by making sustainability convenient and sexy and fun and badass. So I got into sustainability in college. My girlfriends and I would dress up like mermaids and do beach cleanups. And it was just like so obvious that people want to have fun while doing the right thing. So by dressing up and, playing good music, everyone on the beach got involved, and it was just so fun and super rewarding. So from there, we actually turned Save the Mermaids into a 501c3 nonprofit and did after-school education and beach cleanups. And that's really where I found my passion for sustainability. From there, I started working at Los Alamos National Laboratory in waste minimization. And unfortunately, federal work does not suit a mermaid. So after 4 years there, I went off on a venture to create this company. I feel it's important to be part of Summit because the problems around the climate are not going to be solved with one company. We need a ton of companies out there working towards the same solution, working together to solve these problems. And that's really how we're going to end up solving it. I hope that the action items from Summit are, first off, increased awareness, that people really come from it with a deeper understanding of what the problems are and how we can solve them. I believe that there's really two ways to solve the climate crisis. First off, we need bottom-up organization and grassroots activism. So, using your voice, speaking up for what you believe in. And then secondly, we need top-down. So we really need policy and legislation in place that holds companies accountable for the waste that they're producing and the damage that they're creating to the environment. My manifesto for people watching is rethink, reduce, reuse. Those are the 3 steps that we really should be considering instead of looking at recycling as an alternative for waste management. And the first part, rethink, is really about designing better things. How do we eliminate waste from a design and create something that can live in perpetuity and work with the circular economy and end up having a lower net impact? We can create a green new world by using our voice. I absolutely did not understand the power of my voice until starting this company. I used to go around with friends and, people who didn't know me and talk about single-use plastic and get some weird looks and some people who understood. But by creating this company, we really found a community of people that are motivated to make the changes necessary to create a more sustainable world. So don't underestimate the power of your voice, the power of your social media platform to make change, to inspire, one person or maybe thousands of people to make a difference in their daily life.
Graphics powered by Hovercast.
Streaming powered by Wirecast.